Hello, my name is Michael Albert, and I'm the host of the podcast titled Revolution Z. Today's episode 19, is part of the vision sequence, and it's called Judging Participatory Socialism. First, before we begin, I'd like to request that you consider the possibility of visiting the site www.patreon.com/revolutionz. There you can find out a little bit more about this episode, and you can also, should you choose to do so, help us out. We could really use it. The vision sequence of Revolution Z has so far discussed various aspects of a potential new economy we have called participatory economics or participatory socialism. I don't feel that the episodes so far should alone convince you of the worthiness or of the viability of participatory socialism. Given their brevity, the episodes are not fully enough argued. More, they, and even longer treatments, couldn't possibly have addressed all the concerns that you yourself may personally have. I can recommend two paths forward for those who have read these episodes and feel roughly, this seems like it may be valid, and I want to know if it is. The first suggestion is to pursue some more in-depth presentation of the views. This is easy enough to do via search engines and more directly on the website ZNet. The second suggestion, ultimately more important, is to challenge and explore the ideas in your own way. You might write down your doubts and investigate where they lead. You might debate the ideas with friends or workmates. You might convey the ideas to others and see how that fares, perhaps in an organization or in a project you relate to. And feel free to write me at sysop, SYSOP, at zmag.org with any questions you may have. My point is this. The recent surge of interest in and support for socialism in the U.S., and elsewhere as well, is an incredibly positive sign in difficult times. The incredible growth of the organization known as DSA is indicative. But even beyond that, we have some of the most popular politicians in the country now calling themselves socialists, and we have polls showing majorities of young people identifying more with socialism than with capitalism. This is an incredible development. Clearly, to give range and depth to the term's meaning, which is to say, to what in fact people favor when they say they favor socialism, is an item on the agenda. It is something that ought to be done. For the short run, let's say through 2020, that most people involved in the surge of socialist interests can't yet answer what they favor for a whole economy is only a modest lack. But beyond the short term, to achieve fundamentally new economic relations, we will need to share shared vision that is compelling and convincing enough to provide and sustain hope, to inform our actions, to define our demands and our ways of talking with others, and to enlighten how we structurally organize ourselves and how we define our projects to maximize our collective impact and to plant the seeds of a desired future in the present. To move forward, we need vision. But what if after listening to Revolution Z so far, you aren't even convinced that participatory socialism may have merit? Or what if you feel it may have merit, or even that it does, but you don't yet feel that you could make a case for it to a friend, workmate, or family member, much less to someone you don't know? Then perhaps one last summary that considers participatory socialism in light of the values that we initially laid out will make that case and motivate further attention. So here is episode 19 of Revolution Z, titled Evaluating Participatory Socialism. Participatory socialism has four defining institutions. First, there is remuneration for duration, intensity, and onerousness of socially valued labor in place of remuneration for property, output, or power. In other words, in participatory socialism, you get income, which you can use to get stuff to consume, for how long you work, for how hard you work, and for the difficulty or onerousness of the conditions under which you work, as long as you're doing socially valued labor. But you don't get income for property, you don't get income for the amount of output that you generate, and you don't get income simply because you have the power to take it. Second, participatory socialism includes job complexes that are balanced for empowerment effects in place of a corporate division of labor that has about 20% of employees monopolizing empowering work and 80% left with disempowering work. In other words, the way that work is apportioned in participatory socialism, the way that jobs are defined, is to create a situation in which everybody has comparably empowering work. It isn't the case that roughly a fifth of all workers do all the empowering work and lord it over the four-fifths who do disempowering work. Third, in participatory socialism, self-managed workers and consumers' councils are what makes decisions. They do this in place of private owner-dominated capitalistic and or coordinator class-dominated top-down workplace and community decision-making. In other words, workers and consumers are organized into councils. They operate collectively when need be. They operate as individuals when need be. People all get a say in decisions in proportion to the degree that they're affected by them. That's what self-management means. This all replaces the idea of an owner deciding everything or of a coordinator class, a group of empowered workers deciding everything above the rest of the workers. And finally, fourth, council-led, cooperatively negotiated participatory planning takes the place of competitive markets and or authoritarian central planning. In other words, councils cooperatively negotiate what will be produced, what will be consumed, how it will be exchanged from place to place, instead of competitive markets doing that and or a central planning board deciding that for everyone. And that's the defining core of participatory economics: equitable remuneration, balanced job complexes, self-managing councils, and participatory planning. So our evaluative question becomes, can these few institutions, really just four, give participatory socialism a desirable, workable economy? Let's consider income. We called the value that we highlighted for judging any society's approach to income back at the beginning of our vision, equity. If one favors, as the participatory approach does, correlating income with duration, intensity, and onerousness of socially valued labor, then one will favor participatory socialism's approach to income. If one instead favors rewarding a deed to property, so that Jeff Bezos is worth more than some whole countries, or rewarding luck, talent, or training insofar as they contribute to output, so that basketball players earn hundreds of millions and people who make basketballs earn peanuts, or rewarding bargaining power, so the powerful get what they can take and the powerless get taken, then one will instead favor capitalism's or coordinatorism's approach to income. Participatory socialism simply has no mechanism to personally accrue property or bargaining power, and it has no means to use either if one somehow had either to increase income. It has no way to translate lucky genetic endowment, better tools, or even more valuable product into greater income. It has no way to enjoy better circumstances and not have income reduced, or to endure worse circumstances and not have income enlarged. In short, as elaborated in prior episodes, by providing more income for more time worked, for more intense work, or for more work under more onerous conditions, participatory socialism offers appropriate incentives to elicit steps that are, in fact, under the worker's control to do. And by ensuring that a worker wanting to earn more than the social average can do so only by arranging to work longer, harder, or doing more onerous tasks, and that a worker wanting to have more leisure by working less long or less hard or doing fewer onerous tasks can do so only by arranging that reduced load and also accepting proportionally reduced income for their lesser effort, participatory socialism ensures that the labor-leisure trade-off is fair for all and that income differentials are modest and just. It follows that if we adhere to the same equity standard with which we rejected capitalism and coordinatorism at the outset of our vision episodes, participatory socialism succeeds admirably. In a participatory economy, perhaps not every person will always get absolutely precisely his or her due from the overall social product all the time. But deviations will occur only due to errors of judgment, or sometimes even idiosyncratic spite, but not due to system-induced differentials. Deviations will not be systemic. They will not enrich any one sector at another sector's expense, and they cannot grow large. Participatory socialism will be equitable. Fair enough, but what about the second value we highlighted for economic ethics, solidarity? Solidarity requires that individuals respect one another's circumstances and well-being as part of economic life. Solidarity even requires, to be optimal, that economic activity promotes empathetic social ties. Participatory planning explicitly seeks solidarity. Each person gains increased income only by exerting more effort or by everyone's base income increasing at once. No one can increase their income by taking a share that would otherwise go to someone else. We do not increase our income by diminishing that of others, but only in concert with others. And similarly, we improve our conditions of work only if our balanced job complex improves, but if my average job complex improves, by definition, everyone else's improves as well. We all enjoy the average. With balanced job complexes, equitable remuneration, and participatory planning, when one person gains, everyone gains. My well-being is a condition for your well-being, and vice versa. These attributes are already so singularly different from typical capitalist or coordinator dynamics as to provide an overwhelming argument for participatory socialism. But if we look deeper, will the gloss fade? Consider trying to make a choice among various investment proposals in your workplace or in the economy as a whole. What criteria do you use to judge whether one innovation is better than another? Let's suppose you are a greedy individual with no concern for others. In that case, you will worry only about the impact of the innovation on your own job and income. However, with our participatory approach, an innovation will affect your income only via its impact on the overall social product, and thus the average product per person. So it turns out that even to be out only for yourself, in participatory socialism you have to assess the social good. People may disagree about what choice will have a better social impact, and mistakes may certainly be made. But in a participatory economy, the mode by which we all advance is inexorably mutually supportive. What about job circumstances? The logic is identical. Ultimately, an innovation in your own workplace is not more valuable to you than an innovation elsewhere if the distant one has a better impact on average job complexes than the near one. We each gain when the overall average improves, so to seek gain, we must each pay attention to the overall average. If I work in a pretty comfortable workplace and I make a change, or we make a change that modestly improves our circumstances, the effect on the overall average throughout society is nil. If the coal industry changes, if agriculture changes so that the conditions of work of millions of agricultural workers or hundreds of thousands or thousands of coal miners is improved, the effect on the social average is real and everybody benefits. That's the difference between singular and mutual impact. The bottom line is simple and striking. In market systems, if compassionate people wish to get ahead, they are compelled to ignore or even trample the well-being of others. The system creates antisociality. Nice guys finish last. In a rat race, we all develop rat-like tendencies. In a participatory economy, in contrast, even antisocial people, if they want to get ahead, must do socially positive things, such as trying to advance society's average income and the quality of society's average job complex. We all have shared interests. Markets breed instrumentalist, competitive attitudes that destroy solidarity, even among those personally inclined to be empathetic. Participatory planning, plus equitable remuneration and balanced job complexes, create solidarity and empathy even among otherwise egocentric, antisocial people. So those who prefer to gain by rat racing and trampling others will favor market capitalism or market coordinatorism to participatory socialism. But those who favor collectively benefiting in concert with others will favor participatory socialism. Okay, but what about the third value we highlighted for economic ethics, diversity? Regarding diversity, which we gave very little attention in earlier episodes, we should of course want to have diverse economic options for us to choose among to enrich our lives. But additionally, our choices among diverse options shouldn't be narrowed by pressures bending our inclinations. The point is, there should be great diversity not only in available options, but also in what different people consume or in the jobs different people opt for among available options. We should have a diversity of outcomes that reflects our diversity of preferences. Each person should encounter many options and remain a unique individual in selecting among them. We should each make choices that reflect our own unique dispositions, talents, and inclinations, and not some homogenizing pressure from without. In a society fostering diversity, that is, we anticipate there would be no pressures causing large numbers of people to settle on just a few options, arriving at similar situations not because they all have similar personal preferences, but because they all caved in to similar overriding pressures. We all drink water, and that is certainly not a sign of conforming to external pressure. It reveals, instead, a fundamental similarity that derives from our natures. We all wear clothes, and that too is not a mark of onerous homogenization. It instead expresses a benign common history and conditions. But if many of us wear a uniform, not out of unbiased agreement on its aesthetic or practical appeal, but to indicate that we are like others wearing it, because to do otherwise would be to suffer a loss, then we are suffering diminished diversity due to homogenizing pressure. Similarly, if out of all possible genres of music, the population divides into those who like country, those who like classical, those who like rap, those who like jazz, and those who like rock, and if what a person likes can be predicted by attributes that have nothing to do with their actual, freely developed musical tastes, but instead reflect the impact of structurally imposed class, gender, and racial allegiances that have literally nothing to do with music or innate dispositions, then we can reasonably deduce that a homogenizing pressure has diminished diversity by limiting individual choices. In other words, if we like a genre of music because we are in a class or in a race or in a gender, and that class, race, or gender has a homogenizing pressure that causes most of its participants to like that genre, something has gone wrong. We have wound up with a choice, but the choices are homogenized. They are a product of pressures. Diversity is, it turns out, a subtle matter, though not entirely impossible to assess. Another dimension of diversity is that in decision-making, attention should be paid to the possibility of error. We should, whenever possible, explore diverse alternatives alongside preferred choices, even after a preferred option is chosen. This helps to preclude actors from becoming embedded in an irreversible trajectory of choice that limits future possibility, or that diminishes the quality of future outcomes. Put colloquially, we should rarely put all our eggs in one basket. So how does participatory socialism score in terms of diversity? Relative to other economies, some causes of difference are certainly removed. This can be seen by some as reducing options and therefore reducing diversity. For example, a participatory economy does not have capitalist coordinators and workers, but only economic actors. Class differentiation therefore disappears. Some might say this reduces diversity. Likewise, in a participatory economy, you cannot choose to hire wage slaves, nor can you sell yourself as a wage slave. These options too are gone. Again, some might say this reduces diversity. In a participatory economy, you also cannot have a job that is overwhelmingly only empowering or only disempowering. You cannot parlay productive genetic attributes into greater income or power. You can't power your way to wealth. And there is a sense in which these changes taken alone reduce diversity since, for example, we have gone from having 3 classes to having none, and to ruling out certain kinds of jobs and certain kinds of personal enrichment. But in the participatory perspective, this is like the sense in which instances of capitalism reduce diversity by removing the option to own a slave or to be a king. Gains, not losses. Looking deeper, in the participatory case, it is not only a matter of removing bad options, there is also an offsetting increase in good options. That is, if a society has classes, each actor is part of a group that has interests contrary to those in other groups. This collective confrontation and the commonality of internal class conditions together lead to homogenization within classes, even as it forces competition among them. In other words, if we hold up babies in the hospital and report about them merely what class their parents are in, and then we ask people to predict what tastes and preferences the baby will have later in life, under capitalism we will guess right in a remarkable proportion of cases about a remarkable number of life choices. This means that being in a class narrows the range of outcomes that a person winds up with. It makes some outcomes highly probable, regardless of all other attributes of each baby, whether innate or due to freely unfolding life experiences. In the participatory case, with no classes, the homogenizing effects of class membership are gone. The scorecard for how diversity is upheld in a participatory economy is positive on other counts as well. Not only are class homogenization effects eliminated, but participatory socialism self-consciously favors respect for minority policy position and gives defeated views every opportunity to persist to ensure against majorities making mistakes. This is built into participatory planning by way of its preserving past data and by checks on indicative prices that qualitative information in the initial phases of each new round of planning provide. In contrast, a central but rarely discussed failure of markets is that they ignore the fact that people's preferences are affected by economic circumstances. If a population is confronted by offerings for which some prices are set too high and some are set too low relative to the actual social costs and benefits, as markets will often do, then preferences will bend toward the latter and away from the former. This inaccurate bending of people's true desires will in turn further propel the incorrect prices in the wrong direction, and thereby engender a snowballing effect. The key point is that this market phenomenon is not random. There is always a systemic mispricing of goods that have positive or negative external effects on people who are neither buyer nor seller, because markets don't account for those effects. Due to this, people in market economies become increasingly individualistic, due to increasingly favoring private consumption, less expensive, over public consumption of goods, more expensive, with public benefits beyond what a true comparison of personal and collective benefits would warrant had there been proper pricing. Because market systems promote pursuit of profits, not social well-being, there is no pressure on anyone to notice and curtail such developments. Capitalists see profits to be had by producing mispriced goods and follow that path mercilessly. People's consumption preferences become skewed in accord. Participatory planning, in contrast, impedes such phenomena. First, it properly values items by taking into account all social and individual factors. Deviations from proper pricing derive from honest mistakes and not from systemic biases built into the allocation system. And second, participatory planning recalibrates valuations with every new planning period, precisely to guard against prices snowballing away from what they should be due to past errors, persisting into future periods. It synchronizes taste and behavior consistent with independently presented preferences. The goal is social well-being and not private profit. A participatory economy cannot, however, guarantee perfect adherence to diversity. For one thing, it is critical that other sectors of society also promote diversity, especially as society's cultural institutions. For another thing, no system precludes all biases, much less all errors. But what we can say about the participatory approach is that the most egregious contemporary economic pressures for conformity are removed. There's no more class conformity, no more prices snowballing away from true representation of preferences, and no more profit-seeking that takes advantage of any opportunity, however socially counterproductive. In their place, participatory economy elevates diversity to a central value. It employs decision-making that permits and even welcomes attention to minority views. It properly values economic products. It recognizes economic impact on consumer and producer preferences, and it self-consciously avoids irrational pricing trajectories. So participatory socialism is still sounding good. But what about the fourth value we highlighted for economic ethics, self-management? How does participatory socialism fare regarding people's degree of influence over the decisions that affect them? Participatory decisions are made by whatever method best allows each person to affect each decision in proportion to how each outcome of the decision affects them. Can this be done perfectly all the time? Of course not. But does the participatory approach provide context, information, and motivations in accord with this aim? We shall see. Workplaces involve two broad kinds of decisions. The first involves establishing plans for the unit. Should we invest in improving our workplace? For example, how much output produced by how many people should be our goal. The second involves how we accomplish each month, week, and day what we have set out to do. Consumption decisions are similarly broad. What do I want collectively for the groups I am part of, and what do I want for myself, individually? And having received what I wanted, what do I do with it? Allocation decisions are broadly about what level of work and output should be enacted, what exchange rates should exist among items, and therefore what relative amounts should be produced, who should get what income, and various choices of implementation, such as those concerning participatory planning's facilitation boards. So let's briefly, but more than in prior episodes, consider each domain in terms of its rating vis-a-vis self-management. In workplaces, we have councils that vary in size from work teams to industries. This facilitates people's interactions at each level of individual or collective involvement. If a plant decides together on some action that delimits aims for a specific work team, decisions for how that team then accomplishes those aims may be overwhelmingly its own affair. If so, the team will make those decisions internally, but adhering to the specifically agreed norms that guide the whole workplace. But within a whole workplace, division, or team, how does each participant make such decisions? There is no single answer for all workplaces, or even universally within each given workplace. Decisions have different spectrums of impact. For one thing, most of our work decisions affect not only our own workplace and those in it, but everyone who will consume our products. Our production utilizes inputs that could have been used to produce other things that might meet other needs. So consumers need a degree of say in what goes on in production, just as producers have some say, of course, on what consumers can opt for. Should consumers of stereos have some degree of say even over what a peanut factory produces? Yes, because if the peanut factory makes soy nuts, chicken farmers have less soy feed, which increases beef output, which affects leather production, which reduces some plastic production, which reduces economies of scale in plastic production, which raises the price of stereos. Mediating the complicated interrelations of production and consumption is allocation, in our case, participatory planning, and we will assess the self-management implications of such planning below. For now, assuming, while acknowledging it is a big assumption, that consumers and workers elsewhere have appropriate input into decisions in a specific workplace, what about workers in that specific workplace themselves? Some decisions overwhelmingly affect only me. Some affect only you. Some, after larger decisions are made, affect only a specific work team and each member equally. Some affect that team, but each member unequally. And there are the same variations for projects, divisions, a whole workplace, or even a whole industry. The point is, there is no single decision-making process that can universally deliver influence in proportion to impact for every person every time. What is needed is instead what participatory economics delivers. First, the organization of all actors into appropriately defined subgroups from the whole down to individuals. This is the idea of councils and federations of councils. Second, giving each subgroup an appropriate amount of say. This is the self-managing aspect. Third, allotting decisions to various subgroups using appropriate processes at each level. Sometimes one person, one vote with majority rule, sometimes 2/3 majority, sometimes each actor has a veto, and so on. And fourth, giving suitable time for advanced preparation for decisions, suitable time for assessment and reassessment, and suitable time for minority voices to delay final choices or to experiment with parallel choices. All in all, we can't say that a participatory workplace will perfectly succeed in properly allotting influence over every production decision. What we can say, however, is that there is no structural impediment to doing so, and there is every possible admonition and structural pressure on behalf of doing so. For example, a participatory workplace does not have corporate hierarchies that essentially subordinate typically 80% of the population to having little or no say over their work, giving about 20% considerable say over everyone's work. Participatory workplaces instead facilitate proportionate say. They allow redress of mistakes. They balance both empowerment and income properly. Actors have information, skills, and confidence needed to participate. It is hard to see how a system without workplace councils as venues of participation, without balanced job complexes to ensure ability to participate, and without remuneration for effort and sacrifice to ensure equitable relations could do better in providing participatory self-management to its workers. Assuming, that is, that the workers not only have this flexible array of conditions in their own workplaces, but also have proper input into broader allocation decisions, which we will assess shortly. But first, what about consumption? Consumption is an economic activity that has inputs and outputs, and that is, in that respect, abstractly the same as production. Both have things coming in, things going out. Therefore, unsurprisingly, the participatory self-managing decision dynamics of consumption are similar to those of production. Again, we have layers of councils designed to group people with shared decision-making affinities, such as individuals, families, neighborhoods, counties, and states or regions. Again, decisions are apportioned to these councils and apportioned within them in accord with the impact on the group and on the individuals involved. As with production, consumers collectively establish appropriate processes for different types of decisions within the appropriate level of consumer council, having only the norm of self-management in common. The system is not perfect, but there is no systemic obstacle to everyone involved having proportionate say. And, as in the production case, consumers have every incentive to seek proportionate say up to not spending too much time trying to add the last dimple of accuracy to every accounting, as against getting on with life. In a participatory community, each individual largely determines his or her own personal consumption, and the impact of each person's preferences registers in the continually refined prices that contextualize all choices. Each collective, such as a family or a neighborhood, has nearly sole say over what they propose to collectively consume, though if there are significant effects on wider constituencies not already accounted for in wider decisions, the proposal may be reviewed at the affected higher level as well. If I am going to consume a bicycle, someone must produce it. My choice has implications for those who do the work of producing it. Likewise, if I consume an item, then the inputs needed to produce it aren't available for producing some other product that someone else may have wanted. My choice affects those folks as well. If we assume, for the moment, that allocation proportionally accounts for the mutual impact of different production and consumption decisions, and that consumption councils likewise accurately apportion influence over the consumer's share of each such decision, we still have to consider the less tractable fact that once I get my consumption items, and once I decide how to consume them, there could be effects on others from that as well, so that perhaps others should have a say in whether, indeed, I got them in the first place. Suppose I ask for not much milk or juice, but I ask for so much brandy and vodka that quite obviously I am or I will become an alcoholic or a dispensary. But even so, the total volume of brandy and vodka sought by our council is fine in the view of producers. This is not a felt problem for producers, but my choice will likely adversely impact my family, my neighbors, and my community. The same would hold if I was about to purchase lots of firearms, say, or an outdoor sound system appropriate for a stadium, but not for my backyard, that abuts many other backyards. It is good that the prices of these items reflect their broader social implications, but it may not be alone sufficient. These choices could all be okay from the broad standpoint of allocation writ large due to abiding broader prior choices, yet not okay viewed more locally. The point is, consumption has diverse external effects, and those effects can be globally well accounted, yet simultaneously locally large and adverse and not well accounted. Some effects, that is, are broad and general and accommodated by the participatory planning system most broadly. For example, the overall price of alcohol reflects its average social and health impacts, as does the overall price of products that pollute. But with some products, even with proper valuation in the large, specific apportionments can still be horribly adverse due to contingent local effects. Participatory planning should include a provision that consumption council members can collectively assess individual consumption orders, indicating their concerns about specific orders that have potentially harsh negative external implications, and seeking remedies that may require additional expenses, and, in the extreme case, maybe even collectively precluding such orders from being fulfilled when appropriate. In other words, a neighborhood could see a private order for huge quantities of alcohol, guns, or a raucous outdoor sound system. And even though the neighborhood citizens are not over-consuming in total, and even though producers are ready to supply the products in the quantity requested, and even though the people making the orders are within their budgets, nonetheless, the neighborhood could intervene and first ask for an explanation. Maybe the alcohol is medicinal, or for household chemistry experiments, or maybe the guns are for an abstract art display, or maybe the sound system is for parts that are going to be put to an entirely different and benign or even very positive use. And then, if the explanations are found wanting, could literally forbid these type of purchases within these units. This is comparable to contemporary zoning laws, saying that you cannot disturb the peace, for example. But in the participatory case, it is democratic and without profit-seeking, and the details are organized to reflect the recognition that those impacted by decisions should influence them proportionately. Moreover, in the participatory case, the specific individual consumption requests and the dialogue about them can be anonymous. Importantly also, the people involved in decision-making at all levels are living lives of dignity and well-being, harboring no systemic socially buttressed biases or fears. All in all, therefore, as with production, similarly for consumption, organization into councils facilitates appropriate levels of self-managed oversight and influence. People are prepared by their life responsibilities and also have means to participate. And the system urges self-managing decision-making processes, and it provides means to continually reassess and improve them. Okay, so what about allocation writ large? Does allocation matter to self-management, and if so, why and how? Consider favoring and setting up workers' and consumers' councils and balanced job complexes and supporting all participatory socialism's admonitions about attaining self-management, but on top of all that, retaining markets for allocation. Markets would not provide proper valuations or qualitative information that would enable workers or consumers to develop and decide on agendas. Pollution effects, such as exhaust in the air, would go unaccounted. So too would negative social effects, for example, of alcoholism, opioid addiction, or mass gun shootings. Markets would compel workers and consumers to make competitive choices regardless of or even against others' interests, and even against their own humane inclinations. Firms would have to speed up, cut corners, not clean up, and even purposefully pollute. Buy cheap, sell dear. Markets would require firms to win market share and thereby maintain or increase their workers' incomes, even at the expense of their own quality of work life. The workers would have to advertise to sell what shouldn't be sold. They would have to entice with stories of doing what can never be done. Markets would apportion influence over decisions in accordance with income levels, and income levels would deviate from a just distribution due to luck, circumstances, tools, genetic endowment, and bargaining power. And while none of these factors have much to do with how much someone is affected by a decision, they would nonetheless largely determine how much say each person gets. Markets therefore yield an Al Capone economy. Take as much as you can, contribute as little as you can. Markets only consider the impact of a decision to buy or sell on the buyer or seller in proportion to their relative bargaining power. Markets ignore the impact a decision would have on others due to production or consumption externalities. They generate an atomized approach to life. Me first, you last. For all these reasons, markets would psychologically, behaviorally, and materially subvert self-managing tendencies even of council organizations. You can't do what you would naturally, rationally want to do. You must do what competition requires. Okay. Markets are contrary to self-management. But what about participatory planning? What level of influence does participatory planning afford each actor in each decision? First, we should note that participatory planning reverses each of the above-mentioned failings of markets. Participatory planning provides accurate valuations by properly accounting full personal, social, and ecological costs and benefits, and providing appropriate qualitative information for regularly recalibrating indicative prices with qualitative data. Of course, we haven't explored all the details of this in our episodes, but fuller presentations are readily available. We have gone into a lot of detail in this episode, more than usual, and I hope that's okay. I just wanted to be true to the topic. If fuller presentations didn't work, then we would know that we have a system that might work, and therefore we ought to have an injunction to provide the additional details to make it do so. Participatory planning ensures that workers and consumers pay attention to one another's conditions and allows each to advance only in accord with others advancing by making sure all incomes and conditions deviate from social average only for mutually agreed reasons. Participatory planning permits workers to assess their own conditions and to pay attention to them in their decision-making by having workers input their preferences via their councils and with no need to maximize anything other than their own and others people's well-being. It does not force them to subvert their own interests and those of others to stay in business. Participatory planning apportions income in accord with effort and sacrifice, and in any event, it does not force or even permit people to try to maximize profits, surplus, or even revenues. Participatory planning incorporates attention to all social costs and benefits of transactions by means of its planning procedures, accounting modes, and facilitating tools, while utilizing its levels of self-managing council structure. Still, while it is good to remove market's various critical impediments to sensible allocation-related decision-making, this is not the same as having positively accomplished truly democratic decision-making. Does participatory planning give producers and consumers proportionate say over each type of decision as well as possible? There are two main issues. First, does participatory planning create a context that is consistent with or that propels people to have appropriate impact in non-allocation workplace and consumption decision-making? Or does it differentiate among individuals such that even beyond allocation, their differences adversely affect their capacities and inclinations to participate? And second, regarding allocation itself, does each participant have input in proportion to how they are affected? For the first point, participatory planning requires of buyers and sellers attention to decision-making in general. It instills expectations that each person will influence decisions and not be subordinate or domineering. It draws out the personal traits commensurate to involvement, and it introduces no advantages or disadvantages to any group of people that would interfere with their proper participation in non-allocation interactions in workplace councils, neighborhoods, or anywhere else. For the second point, regarding specifically allocation decisions, each person participates at every level, personal, group, or team, unit, industry, neighborhood, or county, by means of council structures that have appropriate influence at their level. Each person manifests his or her individual or collective preferences in ways identical to everyone else, and with as much intent and energy as their level of concern and of effectivity impels. Each person registers more or less desire to do some production or undertake some consumption, or to oppose either, thus affecting that production or that consumption in accordance with their own desires, and without inappropriate power due to inappropriate income or workplace authority. Consider the level of production of bicycles. Each consumer influences this in accord with their desire for bicycles, how much they are affected by them, as does every other, including concerns about the implications of bicycles. So too, each bicycle worker impacts this decision in accord with how they assess their involvement and the effects of bicycles. And the workers have roughly the same overall impact in the outcome as the consumers, each group in essence negotiating with the other. But what about those consuming other goods that are affected by the number of bicycles to be produced, or who are producing other goods needed for bicycles, or replaced by them? As you can see, this is a generalized problem of intersecting implications and impacts. It is one of those cases where a mathematician can provide a very subtle and detailed analysis, requiring pages upon pages of arcane formula demonstrating the result, or where we can arrive at least a tentative opinion more quickly and intuitively. Which factors facilitate impact on decisions? Only factors equally possessed by every actor, and which each actor will manifest up to the socially designated influence of their decision-making unit and their own level of preference, within the context of their budget, each with the same rights and opportunities that others have. The calculus of desires and influences will not always occur perfectly, of course, but it's hard to see how one could attain the desired goal of appropriate self-managing influence more closely, overall, and on average. Of course, that full mathematical presentation is desirable. Of course, more details, at least up to a point, are desirable. What we have done here, however, is to at least make a broad case, a hopefully compelling case, that participatory planning facilitates, provides means for, and in general makes possible collective self-management. Okay, then what can we say about class relations? We didn't list classlessness as a value in our list relevant to economic ethics, but we of course consider class relations crucial to economic outcomes. So how does participatory socialism fare regarding class relations? If it generates class division and rule, then that would in turn subvert all other aims sought. In prior episodes, we emphasized that the participatory approach believes in 3 primary classes in modern societies, rather than 2. Participatory socialism, therefore, needs to eliminate class division by removing not only property differences that define classes, but also work role differences that empower some actors and weaken others, that enrich some and impoverish others, or that pit some systematically against others. The key class-related innovations of the participatory approach are that: first, there is no private ownership of means of production. All actors have the same ownership relations to economic assets as all others. There are no capitalists. Second, there is no longer a corporate division of labor in which about 20% of employees who do overwhelmingly empowering work, and who we call the coordinator class, dominate about 80% who do overwhelmingly disempowering work, and who we call the working class. In its place, balanced job complexes eliminate systematic differentiations bearing on power or income due to a division of labor. Third, there is remuneration according to effort and sacrifice. While some people may exert more in their labors and others less, so that people can have different incomes, there is no competition for income. There is no exploitation of some people by other people. And there is a limit, in any case, on how much more effort anyone could possibly exert, and therefore how much more income anyone could possibly earn. And finally, allocation by participatory planning instead of central planning or markets abets rather than subverts all the other gains. In participatory socialism, there is no class of owners that occupies a level above others. There is no capitalist class owning workplaces and resources. In participatory socialism, there is no commanding class above others. There is no coordinator class monopolizing empowering work. In participatory socialism, there is also no obedient class beneath others. There is no working class relegated to low income and little or no say in their circumstances and in their overall economic life. This is also because there is no privately held capital, no monopolization of empowering circumstances, and no group that occupies a position subordinate to others in property relations or the division of labor. The result is that in participatory economics, also called participatory socialism, there are only people who contribute to economic output and who by virtue of doing so have a just claim on items in the social product, or who physically cannot produce but have the same claim simply by virtue of being human. There are, in other words, only people who all have the same ownership condition in the economy, who all work at balanced job complexes, or, for health or age reasons, cannot, but receive full income nonetheless, and who are all, therefore, without any class differentiation. Historically, what has been variously called 20th century socialism, centrally planned socialism, market socialism, state socialism, or deformed socialism are all better called variants of coordinatorism. For while the systems named may differ in having markets or central planning for allocation, and in whether the political system operating alongside the economy is more or less authoritarian, they are the same in elevating a class of empowered employees above a class of disempowered employees. At this point, I think we would do well to acknowledge that assessing the merits of an economic system is a tricky business. Partly it is about what we have discussed in this episode, the dynamics and implications at play within the economy itself. But economies don't float in some zone separated from the rest of life. Societies have women, men, and children, races, ethnic groups, and other cultural communities, political relations, relations with other societies, and of late, most crucially, relations to our natural surroundings, the ecology. So assessing an economic system entails not only addressing what we might call its singularly economic effects, as we have been doing in this episode, but also addressing its intersections with gender and kinship, community and cultures, citizenry and polity, other societies, and with the ecology. Mostly assessing these broader matters depends on having a picture of these other parts of life, which picture we will be adding to our social vision in coming episodes that deal with each in turn. But even before doing that, we can say a little. Participatory economics cannot abet any hierarchical differentiation among communities of culture, people with different sexual preferences, or different genders, for the simple reason that it structurally cannot reward nor empower any conceivable constituency excessively compared to any other. Everyone is involved and provided for according to the same procedures and norms, with the same responsibilities and options, with the same benefits, More, if a society had sexist kinship relations, or racist cultural relations, or authoritarian political relations, these would actually conflict with and be challenged by participatory economic relations. That is, any gender, sexual, race, or political hierarchy, for example, those we see all around us nowadays, would clash with equitable remuneration. It would clash with balanced job complexes. It would clash with self-management. It would clash with participatory planning, and vice versa. And all that is a good indicator that participatory economy intersects with these domains in precisely the way a feminist, anti-racist, and anti-authoritarian would hope for, a claim that we will explain more fully after exploring vision for those other centrally important facets of life in coming episodes. We will also address ecology in itself, as its importance warrants. But even now we can report that because participatory economics accounts for ecological as well as social costs and benefits, and because participatory economics engenders full participation and self-management, and because it includes no drive to accumulate, it gives populations the means and influence to treat ecology sanely, sustainably, and even with appropriate caretaking respect. This episode has gone into a bit more detail than many of the others. I wanted to do justice to the topic. I understand that it can be demanding, especially as you just hear it and it just flies by and you're not reading it. Makes it hard. I know that. Nonetheless, I did want to cover the ground as best I could in the time allotted. I hope that's okay. To close, I need to ask you once again for your help. Please take a moment to visit our Patreon page, Patreon, www.patreon.com/revolutionz. There you can find out a bit more about our podcast, and should you so choose, you can pledge us some help. We really do need material aid, just as we also need folks to use social media, or your comments, or your interactions with friends or workmates, or with family, to promote Revolution Z to reach new audiences. I want to thank you in advance for listening, and for any support you may be willing to lend. I know that for many, the biggest impediment to helping is actually the time it takes and the mindset it entails. All I can say is that telling others about Revolution Z can take as little as a few minutes on social media, or sending an email, or having a conversation. Yet the impact on Revolution Z's future can be profound. And helping materially can take as little as 5 minutes visiting www.patreon.com/revolutionz and donating as little as $3 a month. Can you do that, please, to support a podcast out of 750,000 podcasts that exist? Because this one isn't about how bad things are, but is instead about how good things could be. And because this one isn't about how daunting capitalist, corporate, racist, neoliberal, misogynist, and even fascist obstacles are, but how powerful and effective, informed, committed movements can be. Give helping a thought, please. And that said, this is Michael Albert, signing off until next time for Revolution Z.